Hi guys, Ingenium. This is a Lexus GS450H buyer's guide. It's for the S190, so it's the 06 to 11. So I'm going to show you some things to look out for, what to check for when you're buying a Lexus GS450H. Hopefully it'll either save you some money or stop you buying the wrong car. Okay, so one of the problems that you got to look out for is, ideally if you can tell the seller not to start the car, because that way it'll let all the oil drain to the bottom. So they have something called VVTI Rattle. Basically when you start the car, it'll make a bit of a racket and it sounds like the car's broken, but it should pass within about 30 seconds. So I've not started the car, we'll see if it makes a noise. It doesn't necessarily make it every time you start it, but it does make it. Basically, just make sure that noise stops. If it doesn't, it could be something else, but it should stop quite quickly, so I'll see if I can demonstrate it here. So you hear that? So it should quieten down after less than 30 seconds. Right, so the first question you got to ask is, do you actually want a GS450H? Oh, let's stop. Why do you want it? You're not going to get Prius type MPG or diesel type MPG, but the car is really fast and refined, so obviously that's an advantage. But don't think you're going to be getting 40 miles per hour around town and stuff like that. Although it is pretty good on fuel considering what the car is. What sort of colour do you want as well? So this car is silver with a beige interior. That's probably the least desirable, and in my opinion the worst combination as well. I would say the most desirable one is black on black, so that'd be black paint, black interior. That looks the best in my opinion, it looks the nicest. But you also get some weird colours like gold and beige interiors and stuff like that. Although they're rare, I would say your majority of cars are kind of silver or kind of these sort of pastel-y colours. But black is definitely more desirable, and you'll pay more for black cars with black interiors especially. What sort of trim level do you want? So the good thing about these GS450Hs, I think, well, all the GSs to be fair, they come with pretty much everything. So you get touchscreen as standard, air conditioning, and pretty much everything is standard, especially in the GS450H because it's one of the kind of higher trim levels. So your main kind of thing is your SE versus SEL. Your SE is basically everything, and your SEL is everything and more. So your SEL, a lot of people say it just has radar, cruise, and sunroof. That's not actually true. Yeah, it does have radar, cruise, and sunroof, but because of the radar cruise control, you also get pre-collision detection. So before you're about to crash into a car, it'll kind of like, it'll maybe apply the brakes for you. It's got seatbelt pretensioners. Seatbelt pretensioners. So if it detects you're about to go in a crash, it'll kind of pull on your seatbelts a little bit. Force limiters, and I think it's got rear side curtain airbags as well. So that is something that the SEL has over the SE. A lot of people always say make sure you specify that it's got a Mark Levinson in it. I've not seen any GS450Hs without the Mark Levinson, but I do recommend that you definitely get the system. So the Mark Levinson dash will look like that. It's got like a little Mark Levinson thing there. That's very important, and you'll also see there's like a speaker there and things like that. Like I said, I've not seen any GS450Hs without the Mark Levinson. I'm sure they do exist, but try and get one with a Mark Levinson because the system is pretty banging. One thing to note as well is, although this is 06 to 11, I'm kind of mainly focusing on 07, 08, 09 kind of cars. I think 09 they got a hard disk drive system for this, and in 2008 they got an auxiliary port for this, or an aux in. So basically you listen to your own music. If you've got an 07 or a 57, I think you're stuck with, you're going to have to get a tape deck adapter, either a Bluetooth one or just one with a lead. It's a pain in the backside, but you can get other options, but I found that the cheapest way to get your own music in here is just stick in a tape deck. But like I said, the 08 onwards have an auxiliary ports. Okay, my car's got most of the flaws I'm about to show you today, but I mean I was desperate for a car at the time. But anyway, so one of the main things on the exterior you should look for is corrosion on the front bonnet. So the aluminium bonnet, well it's obviously aluminium as I just mentioned, it can get corrosion on the front lip here. So you'll see this, that's not rust, that's corrosion because it's on an aluminium, but that's very common. It'll get a little bit worse sometimes, you know, you'll see it there. It's not terrible, it is something that you probably want to get checked out, but it's kind of fine, to be honest. But it is something cosmetic you need to look out for. Same thing with the alloy wheels as well. The alloy wheels are prone to corrosion. It can get so bad apparently that they won't hold air as well. These ones seem to be fine, they're holding air fine, but it is something to look out for. If they look really kind of worse for wear, just kind of keep that in mind. The other thing is obviously check for obvious signs of damage, scratches, bangs, dents, rust around the arches, all that kind of stuff. See these back, hopefully you can see that, see these back two strips here, these ones here. On some cars they can lose the colour. They actually look better in my opinion when they're not painted, but so this will stop being body coloured, this strip here will stop being body coloured and it'll just peel back to silver. I think maybe they're aluminium strips as well, but I've seen that happen on other coloured cars like red cars and things like that. I think silver it just maybe sticks out less, but that is something to look out for. The other thing as well is, does your car come with exhaust tips? So these aren't the standard, well basically the GS450H has exhaust tips on it, so although that's the normal exhaust, the GS450H has fake tips that will look a lot bigger, so mine's missing both of them. Factor that into the price and maybe use that as something to haggle down as well. So the engine and drivetrain is generally pretty reliable. The engine's obviously a 3.5 litre V6 2GR FSE. It's got the direct and port injection, which stops the valves getting kind of coked up with carbon. So generally the engine itself is pretty reliable. It's in loads of cars in North America and other places. Hopefully I've shown you what the VVTI Rattle is. If not, I'll show you it here. It's not something that's going to damn your engine, and apparently it costs a lot to fix. So if you do have the VVTI Rattle, just don't worry about it, but just make sure it goes away fairly quickly. Are your bonnet struts working? Because if not, then it's a bit of a pain. But yeah, make sure the idle smooths out in 30 seconds. If you can smell, when you start the car, if you smell a little bit of fuel, that's fine. It runs rich for the first kind of couple of minutes, I found. If the exhaust smoking white, again, that's fine. But just make sure once you've drove it, the white smoke kind of stops and it's not just bellowing white, blue or black smoke or anything. I mean, it shouldn't, but generally when you start it, there's a lot of white smoke coming out. But once it's heated, there shouldn't be that much smoke coming out. The engine's obviously strong, like I said, but make sure you check the oil and all that kind of stuff, because obviously, no matter how strong your engine is, you don't want to run it without oil. When you're speaking to the seller, ask about the service history. Full Lexus service history is good, if you can get it, but the main reason that you want to get the full service history is, I mean, one obviously is that if they're taking it to a Toyota Lexus dealership, they'll be fitting OEM parts to it, hopefully, which are better parts. But the other thing as well is usually you'll get a hybrid health check done at the same time, and that can be peace of mind because they're basically just telling you, yeah, your hybrid system's still pretty good. So you're kind of getting it's not the be all end all, but it is giving you kind of peace of mind for until the next time you get it checked that it's kind of working. Obviously, faults can happen in that year, but so long as it's been kind of serviced before, like not so long since you've had since you're looking at the car, it should be fine. But the problem with hybrid problems is that they can kind of appear from nowhere, sometimes anyway. So make sure all your service things have been done as well. This car doesn't ask for much, to be fair, but just make sure it has been done. Spark plugs are due every 60,000 miles. They're iridium ones. Coolants every 100,000 miles, and oils every, some people say 12,000 miles, but I would say 10,000 miles or every year. Lexus, if it's been serviced at a Lexus dealership, great. If this has been done by either an independent or just a normal garage, it should still be fine, but just make sure, you know, the maintenance has been done. Like I said, these are strong engines, but you don't want to be leaving it for years without service and all that kind of stuff. There was a recall on these cars for valve springs. Apparently, the machine was like out of spec or out of tolerance or something, and it kind of like left a mark on the valve springs, and it kind of left a weak point. And apparently, they should be replaced under warranty. I've not really had so many people going on about this. Either Toyota Lexus fixed this, or it just wasn't really that big of a deal. But I've not really had anybody's engines going bang because of valve springs. But maybe just check with Lexus that it has been done. So the problem with this car, in my opinion, is if there's a lot of big bills that you can get, but there's no real way to check for them. And I know you're thinking, well, great, why are you telling me? It's not to put you off, but it's just so you know and you're aware of the costs. and it's better to go into purchasing this car knowing what can happen rather than me just saying, oh, it's great, it's a Toyota and it'll run forever. These cars obviously do have problems. So one of the big bills you can get is the hybrid inverter, which is about £1,500 to fix, or just for the part rather. And the other one is a gearbox pump, which is about £1,000. They are not super common that they seem to break, but it is enough that I should mention it. And so you know, the problem with an inverter is generally I've not read too many people saying, "Oh, my car's acting funny," and then the inverter's gone. Generally, it's just one of the things that one day you'll start the car and the inverter's gone. Same with the gearbox pump. Apparently, they seem to run, and then when the gearbox pump knackers, then that's it. The gearbox pump just kind of breaks in a warner. So that's a bit of an annoying thing. As I was saying earlier as well about the hybrid check from Lexus, it's good, but it's not everything. Make sure you take it in for an extended test drive. So don't just give it 10 minutes. Drive it around for half an hour if you can. Even just say to the guy or lady, whoever's selling the car, look, I'll even pay you for the fuel. I just need to take this car on a longer test drive. You need to check that the battery is charging up to 80% or plus, or whatever, how many bars on the display. And then ideally, if you can, try and put it in EV mode once it's heated up, so you drain the battery down to like 20%. Usually that's kind of what it'll drain down to, but then when you're driving it, hopefully it'll charge back up again, and hit that 80% kind of mark again. If it's kind of fluctuating from 100% down to like 0, then that's not right. It should be running in that sort of range. Faulty battery packs do happen, especially with these getting older and they're getting more miles on them now. They do happen. It'll cost you maybe £800 to £1,000 to put right. If you do it yourself, though, you can save a lot of money. That is something you could potentially work on, but it is a bit of a big job. It's not a massive job, but you need to kind of know what you're doing. But it is a possible job to do anyway. But that is, believe it or not, actually, the hybrid kind of element, it's usually like one or two cells that go bad and they'll replace that. But that still seems to be, the hybrid system rather, sorry, still seems to be a fairly reliable system. So it's not too bad. Again, what I was saying with the hybrid check, it's not the be all end all. You could have hybrid problems and you could put a code reader in, clear them out, and sometimes they might not reappear for days. So again, that is something that if you take it for an extended test drive, you'll be able to see. Some people say take an OBD2 reader, stick it, a Bluetooth one, stick it in the port. I've got a video on where the port of the OBD2 reader is, and download an app called Dr. Prius, and that'll give you a battery health check. I've not personally tried that yet. I don't know if it works, but that is something to consider if you are buying one of these cars. An OBD2 reader, a Bluetooth one, usually costs you about £5. So what have you got to lose? And to be honest, it's really good to have one anyway. Right, I'm not going to get underneath the car to show you this, but bring a torch with you, obviously. An expansion lamp's even better. Phones are fine, but ideally try and bring a torch with you. Just do the usual checks. Is it rusty? Is it bent? Blah, blah, blah. Common things on these cars are exhausts. Exhausts seem to be leaking and blowing. Obviously, just with the age of the cars now. If you can, try and check for misting or leaking dampers. It's fairly common in the GSs. The parts are about £350. Well, just the shock absorber itself is about £350 a corner. Because the 450H has electronically controlled dampers, so basically there's a little switch in the cabin that you can put in a sports mode. It's about half that price if you want to just put GS300 dampers on there. They're not electronically adjustable. It won't bring up any warning lights on your dash because it's not connected, but obviously you lose the ability to put in sports mode. A lot of people I never use sports mode anyway, so what difference does it make? I'd rather have the cheaper dampers. But that is a weak part of the car. The dampers generally tend to go, so if you can see any misting, or dampness around the dampers, keep that in mind, and when you're on the test drive, you should be able to tell. Okay, so when you're on your test drive, check every button just to make sure it works. Now there's a lot of buttons here, so check all these buttons, check all those buttons. Does the disc work? Don't check the tape because who cares about tape, but does the stereo work? Do those buttons work? Does the heated seats work? Does the sports button work? Does all that stuff work? And then remember as well, there's this thingy here where you press it and all them come out. Check all them because the stuff on the rear blinds and stuff like that, and they can be broken. So just check every button, make sure it works. If you got the Mark Levinson, but with any stereo, but especially the Mark Levinson, it's a really good sound system. If you want, bring your own CD or even just put it on the radio, turn it up a little bit, and just make sure there's no distortion, there's no crackling, I mean, the loudest I ever take the system to is like 50, and that's usually too loud to listen. So about 40 should be loud enough for most people. But yeah, like I said, make sure there's no rattling from the speakers, distortion, crackling, anything like that. Make sure the sound's kind of coming out, it sounds the way it should. So yeah, that's kind of the Mark Levinson, that thing there. Make sure obviously it takes discs and it gives you them and takes them out, because sometimes they can kind of get a bit funnier with age, but generally it's not a problem. Um, does your dash creak under the test drive as well? These cars are notorious for creaking dashes, pillars, headliners. This car creaks as well. It's annoying, but it's not the end of the world. Apparently, you can open up the dash and put foam pad and stuff in there. I can't bother doing that, but if it does creak, it does creak and it will creak. And if it doesn't, then it's obviously been fixed, so that is good. The ride will be firm, but just make sure it's not overly crashy. If you're going over a bump and it's like boosh, you're like, oh my goodness, that means your dampers are probably on the way out. But it will be firmer than you'd expect from a car this plush, so do keep that in mind. When you're accelerating, does it accelerate smoothly? There's no herky-jerkiness, there's no kind of hesitation, there's no kind of, moving back and forward. Make sure it's quiet at slower speeds as well. So just make sure the engine's not, making excessive noise or revving too highly or anything like that. You just want to make sure the CVT is working the way it should be. Around town, the car should be very quiet. If you can, try and get the car up to higher speeds as well. Try and take it on the motorway, something like that. Try and do a wide open throttle pull above 56 miles an hour. Make sure that the clock's here. Make sure the needle jumps up to about the 250 kind of kilowatt mark. Make sure the hybrid and the engine are working properly. Make sure the CVT is kind of working properly, and that'll just kind of make sure that the car's driving the way it should. It should pull like a train as well, especially when you floor it. So just make sure the performance is there, because I've seen a few people saying, "Is this right?" And somebody's posted something like the 0 to 60 or the 30 to 60, and it doesn't look as fast as my car. I'm not saying my car's super fast, but it just doesn't look as fast as other videos I've seen on the GS450H either. Check the car doesn't pull into hard braking, so if you can, when you're slowing down, try and brake hard. If the car's all over the place, that could be a few things. It could be tracking, it could be seized calipers, so it could be a few things. The leather's nice in this car as well. It's really nice, it's really soft, really supple. It should be perforated as well. Just make sure it's not overly worn or cracked or anything like that. The car does have heated and cooled seats, just check them as well. Another thing to check as well is, are the mats OEM ones? These ones are OEM mats. It's not a big deal, but it is just handy to have nicer mats and then cover them up with other ones. But it is something kind of that you should maybe just check. Check obviously all the windows go up and down, and check if there's any warning lights on the dash. Obviously if it comes up with something saying like hybrid error or traction battery error or whatever like that, unless you've got the money to fix it and you're getting it super cheap, then walk away. This one actually has an error light. It says TMPS error or something like that. So the tyre pressure monitoring system, one of the sensors has gone on that. But they can be about £100 to fix, so it's not really super cheap. As I was saying earlier about the brakes, if you can try and do if you try and brake hard when you're slowing down from kind of fast speed, obviously safely, just to see if it's kind of going anywhere. At the end of the test drive as well, just put your hand up to the brake discs. The calipers, front and rear, can stick. It's a fairly common problem on these GSs, so just check that you don't have any sticking calipers. Even when you come to change the brake pads, a lot of people find that the inners are wearing fast in the outers and stuff like that. So a lot of these cars do have sticking calipers. If they've been replaced, great, and if not, then you should maybe factor that in. Another weak point of these cars, this is their rear door. So it can sometimes be quite tough to open the rear door, and that is because, let's see if we can get the camera to these, the hinges. So I don't know what the deal was with these hinges, but you can spray them with like a lubricant, that'll loosen them up for a couple of days, but then they'll go back to being tight. You'll notice when you open the door, it takes a lot more resistance than it should to open it, and when you close it, it'll feel like it's sticking. It's just because of the hinges. So there's two things you can do. Either you can replace the hinges with an updated part, or you can drill into the actual hinge itself, and you can actually kind of like stuff it with grease in the inside. Spraying it with WD-40 and penetrating fluids and lubricants won't really do it, because it'll wear off really quickly and it's not actually really getting to where it needs to go. So that is another weak point. This is the Lexus GS key. It's a smart key. Basically that means when you walk up to the car, it'll automatically unlock as you touch the handle. So it's quite clever. You can open the boot from there, and obviously you can manually lock it and unlock it. try and get 2 keys, because if you want an additional key from Lexus, it's about £350, maybe even a little bit more. The other thing as well is if you got 2 keys, obviously having spare keys handy, but you can kind of program it so that if one person unlocks the door, it'll go to their seating position, and if the other person unlocks the door, it'll go to their seating position. So it's just kind of handy to have 2 keys. Yeah, so hopefully I've not kind of scared you off this car. I honestly do think this is a fantastic car. Just don't go into this thinking this is a Toyota or this is a Lexus, it'll bulletproof, there'll be no problems with it and they're perfect and Toyota don't get anything wrong. Of course they do, it's the car manufacturer, they get things wrong. Nobody's perfect, no car's perfect. But I was just trying to point out some things just so you know what to look for when you're buying a car. If you are buying a car, one, so you don't get kind of caught with the wrong car, and two, maybe haggle the seller down, say, look, this is wrong with it, this is wrong with it, this is wrong with it, knock a couple £100 off. People compare these cars to 520 diesels or 330 diesels on fuel. That's wrong. You're not going to get better MPG than either of those. But if you compare it to a 535 diesel or maybe a 540i or a 550i or an E500 W211 E-Class, that's the sort of ballpark of performance, and the ballpark of, well, sorry, you'll be getting that sort of performance, but with much less fuel consumption. But you can't compare this to a diesel. It's not in the same league. Something like a 330 diesel will probably get better miles per gallon around than this. A 535 would be more realistic. This will probably get similar MPG to that. But hopefully, with it being a Lexus and a Toyota, hopefully you won't have any of the problems of turbos, injectors, swirl flaps, DPFs, and all that kind of stuff. Of course, this car has its fair share of problems. Obviously it's got the hybrid battery and stuff in it, but still, generally, a hybrid battery replacement can cost you less than injectors or DPF or dual mass flywheel or whatever, the things that go wrong in BMWs and Mercedes. You can fix these cars not cheaply, but fairly cheaply, especially for the performance level that this car's sitting at. I've seen cars with 200,000 plus miles with no hybrid issues as well, which is really impressive. Especially for a car that came out with this amount of technology at this time. Remember, this car's 14, 15 years old now, so it's kind of an old car, but this technology is still really working well. Another thing to consider as well is just if you use OEM parts, they're not cheap, but they are better than some of the kind of patent part manufacturers out there. But yeah, I think if you get this car, you'll really enjoy it. Hopefully it'll serve you well. It'll be cheaper to run than a BMW or Mercedes. Even if you lose out on the MPG, you'll still hopefully run in the running costs. And I hope that helps you buy a good, solid car that'll do you and your family well. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to know anything else, let me know. If there's anything I've not mentioned, problems on the cars wise, if I've forgotten everything, just please put it in the comments down below, because then somebody who's looking to buy this car will scroll down and they'll read your comment and say, oh, that helped me out as well. So it's really handy. You guys always come out with really, really good ideas. Cheers, guys.